The afternoon had started like any other summer day in our sleepy little neighborhood, sun shining a bit too bright, kids scattered in yards and on sidewalks, and that easy rhythm humming along without much fuss. But then, from somewhere near Mrs. Garcia's house at the end of the block, this weird, urgent commotion sliced through the calm, and that's when I realized something totally unusual was happening on our block. It wasn't the kind of noise you hear when kids are just goofing off. No, this was more frantic shouts, hurried footsteps, the kind of chaos that makes you pause mid-sip of your lemonade and peer out the window with scrunched-up eyebrows, wondering if you've somehow stumbled into the middle of a movie scene. So, naturally, I asked myself, how in the world does a lazy summer afternoon spiral into me becoming the neighborhood's accidental hero? Our neighborhood isn't the kind that bursts into drama every other day. Mostly, it's quiet. You know your neighbors by name, especially Jamie next door, who's got this weirdly competitive vibe about everything from lawn care to who can grill the best burgers. Then there's Mrs. Garcia, the darling elderly lady everyone adores but wouldn't want to mess with because she's got this no-nonsense stare that says, "Don't even think about it." And, of course, there's Max, my little brother, a walking tornado of curiosity who's somehow always where he shouldn't be. Earlier that day, Max and I had been lounging on the porch, half-heartedly trying to get through a board game. Max had that look in his eye, that mischievous spark that foretells trouble, while I was trying to savor the last bit of peacefulness before summer inevitably exploded into its usual chaos. Jamie had already started his daily competitive rituals, challenging anyone and everyone to impromptu games or contests, which usually ended in small neighborhood dramas disguised as friendly competition. And Mrs. Garcia, well, she'd been fretting about something. Little things like her front gate creaking or her cat refusing to eat, always turning into these mini neighborhood crises she'd share during our morning walks. But then, the noise near her backyard changed everything. Max was the first to notice something was off. He tugged at my sleeve, eyes wide and breathless with excitement. "You gotta see this," he said, almost dragging me toward Mrs. Garcia's yard. Now, trusting Max usually leads to some sort of trouble, but the mix of urgency from the sounds and that gleam in his eye was enough to send me following. When we got closer, the scene was more puzzling than scary. Mrs. Garcia's gates were swinging open and closed like a windstorm had taken over, but the air was eerily still. And then Jamie showed up. Of course he did, striding over with an expression that shouted, "I can fix this faster than you can blink." Nothing fuels Jamie's competitive fire like a chance to prove himself, even if the situation is a bit out of left field. "Stand back," he announced, already scanning the yard like he was sizing up an opponent. Max was bouncing on his toes, ready to jump into whatever chaos was unfolding, and I just stood there feeling like I'd accidentally walked into some neighborhood soap opera mixed with a surprise challenge. The more we poked around, the more it became clear this wasn't just about creaky gates or a missing cat. Something else was going on, something that demanded quick thinking and teamwork, which, for me, meant figuring out how to keep Jamie from turning this into a full-blown competition while listening to Max's non-stop theories about what we might find. Just as we started making progress, a small mishap nearly unraveled everything. Let's just say that Max's boundless curiosity got the best of him, and what started as a reasonable investigation quickly teetered on the edge of disaster. In that heart-pounding moment, I had to think fast, improvise, and somehow make sure we didn't blow our chance to figure this out. That afternoon, none of us expected to become heroes or to learn a little more about how weird and wonderful our block could be. But as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the street, it was clear that things were about to change around here. And I had a feeling that the title of neighborhood hero was going to stick to me in ways I never saw coming. Our neighborhood was one of those places where the biggest excitement usually came from Mrs. Garcia's unbeatable rhubarb pie contest every fall, or Jamie's relentless crusade to claim the title of Ultimate Lawn King. Seriously, the guy measures his grass with a ruler. So on this particular summer afternoon, Max and I were just settling into a mellow groove, soaking up the kind of peace that feels like it could stretch lazily forever. Max, being 10 and powered by an endless supply of curiosity and sugar from the popsicles we snagged earlier, was already twisting the corner of my shirt with a grin that meant trouble was brewing beneath that innocent exterior. I, on the other hand, was pretending to concentrate on our board game, all while staking out the world through the screen door, my mind half on sports highlights and half on how long I could dodge Mom's calls to mow the lawn. That's when it started. The subtle shift in the neighborhood's energy. Jamie's yard, right next door, was already buzzing louder than usual. I could hear the distinct thwack of tennis balls smacking against the garage door, and Jamie's unmistakable voice, loud enough to sink a battleship, boasting about his unbeatable serve. He wasn't just playing, he was staging a one-man tournament and, of course, making sure the whole block knew who the reigning champ was. From across the street came Mrs. Garcia's faint but familiar tapping, her cane clicking with a bit more urgency than usual. She was on one of her regular patrols, inspecting something, or so I thought. Normally, her anxiety was about the little things, a stray leaf out of place, a pigeon nesting where it shouldn't, or her cat, Seanor Whiskers, suddenly developing a dislike for his tuna. But today, there was something else behind those sharp eyes, a kind of tension that made me glance toward her house with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Something's up," Max whispered, dragging me out of my mental haze. His usual mischievous spark had sharpened into a near-serious glimmer. "I saw movement near Mrs. Garcia's backyard. It looked weird." "What kind of weird?" I asked, already feeling the beginnings of that familiar sibling adrenaline rush that meant the quiet was about to be officially broken. Before I could answer, Jamie burst out from his yard, tennis racket slung over his shoulder like a knight ready for battle. His grin was all competitive confidence and just a touch of, "I'm about to win this, whatever it takes." "Need some help with the situation?" he offered, voice dripping with that competitive edge that made you want to both roll your eyes and roll with it. Max shot me a look that said, "We don't have a choice." So we followed Jamie, slipping through Mrs. Stressed. Garcia's creaky white gate, which swung on rusty hinges making the kind of groan that could wake the neighborhood at midnight. The yard was silent, but the air was thick with anticipation, like the calm before one of Jamie's infamous challenges. At first glance, everything seemed normal, the flower beds blooming in stubborn bursts, Seanor Whiskers nowhere in sight, and Mrs. Garcia's old garden gnome standing sentinel as usual. But then Max pointed toward a tangle of bushes near the back fence where a patch of dirt looked suspiciously disturbed. And, just like that, the game was on. Jamie was already sizing up the scene like it was a five-star opponent. "Looks like we've got a mystery," he declared, flexing his hands as if ready to dig in. Max, bouncing with barely contained excitement, was already poking at the dirt with a stick. "Careful does it," I reminded myself, knowing his curiosity could lead us straight into trouble. Just as we pieced together the clues, a trail of paw prints, a few tufts of black fur caught on a thorny branch, and the sudden realization that Seanor Whiskers was nowhere to be found. A gust of wind slammed the gate shut behind us with a bang that made all three of us jump. Jamie threw me a smirk that was half challenge, half "we're in this now." Max's eyes were wild with a mix of fear and excitement. I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders like a new, oddly heavy backpack. Suddenly, the stakes were clear. This was more than a lost pet or a squeaky gate. Something, or someone, was testing our little neighborhood's calm. And if we didn't figure it out fast, the peaceful summer afternoon was going to spiral into something none of us expected. But just as we were starting to piece it together, Max's stick caught on a hidden wire, or maybe a root, and he toppled over with a startled yelp, sending a cascade of dirt and leaves flying toward Jamie, whose pride took a beating faster than his competitive streak could recover. "Easy there, Max," I said, scrambling to help him up, already thinking how this small slip-up might be the first of many hurdles before we could solve whatever was lurking behind Mrs. Garcia's backyard fence. We were caught between the serious and the absurd, the mystery and the chaos, and honestly, I had no idea what I'd gotten myself into. But one thing was clear. Our quiet little block had just started a summer story none of us could have predicted. Max was practically tugging my arm off as we edged closer to the patch of dirt disturbed near the back fence. He whispered, "Look, it's fresh. Whatever made this was here recently." His eyes darted around like a squirrel on espresso, scanning for any more clues hidden under the summer sun. Jamie, never one to stay silent when a challenge was afoot, crouched down and poked at the dirt with a finger. "Definitely not from a garden gnome battle," he quipped, smirking. "But whatever left this trail, it's not just hanging out for tea, it's on the move." I tried to match their energy, my heart thumping just a bit too loud in my chest. The usual lazy afternoon feel had vanished. Now it was a puzzle begging to be solved, and somehow, the three of us were the only team available to crack it. The odd thing was, I wasn't quite sure if that was a privilege or a punishment. Max's restless fingers pointed again. "I think I saw something shiny under those leaves." Without waiting for permission, he dove in, shoving aside the dry brush with an almost reckless enthusiasm. I nudged Jamie, silently pleading for a bit of caution, but Jamie was already flipping through a mental checklist of possible scenarios, eyes gleaming with that mischievous, "I'm about to be a hero" light. That's when we found it. A tiny, beaten-up collar tangled in the brambles, the kind a cat would wear. But no Seanor Whiskers in sight. Max's face dropped, and Jamie's confident facade flickered for a split second before he straightened up. "We've got to keep looking," Jamie said, voice firm. "If Whiskers is out here, he's probably scared or stuck somewhere." Suddenly, his competitive streak felt like the fuel we desperately needed, instead of the annoyance it normally was. We started tracing footprints and broken twigs further along the yard, the tension twisting tighter with each step. I swear I could hear my own thoughts over the quiet summer breeze. "Don't let this turn into a disaster," I kept telling myself. "Keep it together." But then Max, with that unstoppable curiosity of his, stepped where he shouldn't have on a rusty, half-buried wire loop. The moment his foot sank and twisted oddly, there was this loud snap followed by a yelp. Before I could catch him, Max stumbled forward, arms flailing like a cartoon character falling off a cliff, and collided headfirst into a lawn chair Jamie had left leaned awkwardly against the fence. Jamie's face contorted in disbelief. "Seriously, Max? Could you pick a better way to make a mess?" Max blinked up at us, tangled limbs and all, and mumbled, "Sorry." Meanwhile, the chair did a slow, theatrical topple, inches away from crashing into Mrs. Garcia's prized rose bushes. I sprang forward, helping Max up and trying not to laugh at how perfectly ridiculous the whole moment was, but adrenaline was still kicking in, and the stakes felt real. Jamie's glare softened to a half-smile as he dusted off his hands. "No more heroics until we know what's really going on," I said, trying to sound more authoritative than I felt. "Let's focus." That's when I noticed Jamie wasn't just curious anymore. He was calculating, looking at possible escape routes, obstacles, and even the distant street corner. Max was already back on his feet, scanning the sky like some tiny detective determined not to miss a thing. We were three mismatched detectives in a suburban backyard, piecing together a mystery that seemed to grow more tangled by the minute. Each clue pulled us deeper, and each setback reminded me how little control I really had over the afternoon spiraling wildly out of a simple lazy day. But somehow, despite the near disaster, the clashing personalities, and that endless summer heat pressing down, I had this strange feeling we were close. Close to figuring out what had thrown our quiet little block into chaos, and close to discovering just how far I could push myself to help bring it back. And just as the sun started dipping lower, casting long shadows across cracked pavement and flower beds, the faintest sound caught my attention. A low, almost desperate meow echoing softly from somewhere behind the hedges. I froze for a second, heart ticking louder than the steady summer cicadas, and then without really thinking, I followed the sound. Jamie and Max trailed behind, trading looks that mixed hope and the kind of tension you didn't want but just had to accept. The meow came again, a little louder, more urgent, coming from a dense patch near Mrs. Garcia's garden shed. Carefully, we edged closer, brushing aside leaves and twigs until there it was, Seanor Whiskers, tangled up in a mess of old fishing net and vines, wide-eyed and clearly not nearly as thrilled about his accidental adventure as we were. The sight hit me in two ways. Relief that we'd found the missing mischief maker, and a sudden surge of panic thinking about how in the world he'd gotten himself into such a predicament. I took a deep breath, feeling the warm afternoon light soften around us despite the sweat rolling down my back. "Okay, team," I said, trying to steady my voice like I was in command of some secret rescue mission. "We need to be careful and get him out without freaking him or anything else out even more." Jamie, no stranger to high-stakes situations, at least in the realm of neighborhood showdowns, instantly began scouting the edges of the tangled mess. Max, meanwhile, hovered a little too close to Seanor Whiskers, eyes wide and fingers twitching to reach out. I shooed him back gently, not wanting the little guy to accidentally turn the mission into a catastrophe. With the loudest whisper of a smile, I untangled myself from the surrounding branches and eased my hand toward the scruffy collar. The net was stubborn, knotted tighter than I'd hoped, but after a few cautious tugs and a small prayer that Mrs. Garcia wouldn't hear our racket, I managed to free Seanor Whiskers from his leafy trap. He shot out of my hands like a furry missile, zigzagging toward safety with that particular blend of indignation and gratitude only cats can master. Jamie whooped quietly, pumping a fist as if he'd just scored a winning goal, and even Max cracked the tiniest triumphant grin. That was the moment it hit me. We'd done it. Whatever this crazy afternoon had been, a mix of mishaps, unexpected teamwork, and a dash of "please don't let me mess this up," we'd actually pulled off the rescue. As we trudged back through the yard, peeling leaves and dirt from our clothes, Mrs. Garcia appeared at the gate, arms crossed but a soft smile replacing the usual furrow in her brow. "Oh, my stars," she said, eyes glimmering. I wasn't sure if I'd have to send for help or just put up Lost Cats posters around the block. I shrugged, trying to look modest but feeling every bit of the hero Jamie already whispered about in his usual overly dramatic style. "Well, you saved Seanor Whiskers," she said, voice warm but firm, "and you kept my rose bushes standing, so consider yourself the neighborhood's accidental champions." Max, still buzzing with adrenaline, bounced forward. "We couldn't have done it without Jamie's epic spirit and your quick thinking," he said, eyes shining like he just discovered the world's greatest secret. Jamie gave me a teasing nudge. "Told you I was good at this." That was when it really sank in. This crazy patchwork afternoon wasn't just some random mishap, but a moment where all the quirks of our block, the competitiveness, the caring, and yes, the chaos, came together in the most unexpected way. As the sun slipped behind the trees, casting its final golden glow over the street, I realized that my accidental hero status wasn't about some grand gesture or flawless plan. It was about being there, fumbling through messes bigger than me and somehow managing to pull it off with the people I usually took for granted. By the time Jamie was back in his yard, boasting about the rescue as if it was a tournament win, and Max was plotting the next neighborhood adventure, I stood by Mrs. Garcia's gate, watching the calm settle back into the block. And honestly, I kind of liked it. Turns out, being the neighborhood hero wasn't something you aimed for. It just happened when the moment called for it, usually wrapped in a tangled mess and a whole lot of unexpected laughter. Not bad for a lazy summer afternoon, huh?